Good evening from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Chris Surjak, and I am the Southern Africa Technical Advisor for the USAID-funded Water Sanitation Hygiene Finance Project. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Jeremy Gorelick.
Hello, everybody. Again, as Chris said, my name is Jeremy Gorelick. I'm pleased to be joining you from another part of South Africa, from Cape Town. My reason for being with you today, and the reason why I'm excited to share some thoughts with you, is that I have the pleasure of serving as the head of origination for the Wellers Water Unite Impact Investment Vehicle. Back over to you, Chris.
Together, we'll be presenting a case study on the role of impact investing for scaling fecal sludge management treatment technology in eThekwini Municipality in South Africa. eThekwini Municipality services approximately 35,000 household pit latrines, which provide on-site sanitation services for over 170,000 people. Traditionally, servicing of pit latrines in South Africa in rural areas has been done by closure and relocation or rebuilding once the pits become full. However, in dense urban areas like eThekwini, that's not practical due to space constraints. In these situations, only pit emptying and disposal is a possible means of continuing to provide on-site sanitation services. Over 7,000 tons of latrine sludge needs to be collected each year in eThekwini. Without treatment, sewage sludge is considered a hazardous material and needs to be disposed of in licensed hazardous waste disposal sites, the nearest of which available to eThekwini is over 75 kilometers away. Elsewhere in South Africa, other sanitation service providers dispose of untreated sludge on agricultural fields, which, in addition to contravening South Africa's environmental regulations, also poses significant threats to human health impacts and impacts to water resources. Founded in 2013, PSS Ledepa is a South African manufacturer of fecal sludge plants known as latrine dehydration and pasteurization, or Ledepa. Since 2013, PSS Ledepa has been piloting a demonstration unit installed at the Tongaat Wastewater Treatment Works in eThekwini, which is currently able to treat up to 2,000 tons of fecal sludge per year. Treatment using the Ledepa technology destroys the pathogens in the sludge and renders the material safe for handling and disposal. As such, it can be readily disposed of by use as a soil additive on agricultural fields. This results in reduced human health impacts, reduced transport and disposal costs for the municipality, improved agricultural production, and reduced impacts on limited hazardous material landfill capacity. Ultimately, the use of the Ledepa technology by eThekwini Municipality allows them to continue to provide the necessary treatment and disposals of sludge necessary to continue the provision of on-site sanitation services to over 170,000 people. In order to treat the approximately 7,000 tons of fecal sludge produced each year, eThekwini would need up to 3 Ledepa units. PSS Ledepa is in talks with the municipality about them purchasing an additional 2 Ledepa units that would be manufactured by PSS Ledepa, and then all 3 units would be maintained. In the longer term, PSS Ledepa is marketing its technology to other municipalities and other sanitation service providers looking to expand or improve their FSM services. In the case of eThekwini, PSS Ledepa is ready to self-finance one of the units, but needs additional outside financing or capital to provide for the manufacturing costs of that unit. In order to expand their scale to other municipalities, they'll also need to build stock, needing a long-term investor. Since 2018, USAID WASHFIN program has been providing technical assistance to PSS Ledepa, helping them to prepare to secure commercial financing from banks. In 2018, WASHFIN helped PSS Ledepa develop a business case and financial model in support of their application for financing. However, despite that model demonstrating a robust financial return, the commercial lenders declined to provide financing due to two key risks. One, a risk of municipal repayment default, and two, a perception that this was unproven emerging technology. Following the failure to secure commercial financing, USAID WashFin and PSS LADEPA turned to alternative sources, of which my colleague Jeremy is going to speak about. Jeremy.
Thanks, Chris. It's really exciting to be able to talk about why this, in fact, is potentially a smarter solution. And so on the next slides, we'll talk through a little bit about why the idea of fecal sludge management is, in fact, attractive for impact investors. Many of you out there might not understand what impact investors are. You hear the term, but you question, what is an impact investor looking for, and how, in fact, is that different from the commercial banks that Chris referenced earlier? I would say that there are a couple of very key differences. The first difference is the fact that there will be that appetite to take on a little bit more risk, talking about pioneering or emerging technologies, respecting the fact that innovation is part of what makes fecal sludge management something which is a dynamic and ever interesting field. The other thing, though, that I think is really important for us all to keep in mind is that when we look at commercial banks, they're looking at financial profitability. Their concern is, will we be making back the money that we're looking for? But as a matter of fact, impact investors are motivated by more than just the financial return. Instead, impact investors think about three different things. And I think that all of you who appreciate fecal sludge management will understand that these are all critical. So yes, financial return is important. An impact investor, first and foremost, is a source of capital and will always be looking at what those returns look like and making sure that they are, in fact, getting the money back that they're investing. But they'll look at it and say that we will take a reduction in what that interest rate is, or we'll take a longer view than what a commercial bank would be able to offer. And that's because of the fact that impact investors look at the environmental impact as well as the social impact. So impact investors look at that triple bottom line of different areas, the financial, the social, and the environmental. The theory of change that you see on your screen now talks about why this in fact works and why impact investors find it attractive to think about areas like fecal sludge management and like water and like plastics recycling that are often outside of the remit of commercial banks. What I'll show you on the next slide, again appreciating that we only have a short amount of time together, is what the actual structure is when we think about what an impact investment vehicle looks like. As you can see on this slide, the structure which we're able to depict is the fact that there are, in fact, a number of different funding sources that even come into an impact investment vehicle. And again, without getting into the detail of this, what I hope you'll be able to appreciate is the fact that we're looking at money that comes in from a wide variety of sources. In our instance, we're looking at the fact that retailers are happy to participate because they see an impact from a corporate social responsibility point of view, but that couples with other sources of capital that come in to make a difference. One thing that I will say in closing on my section is this is not the first opportunity where the impact investment vehicle is looking at the concept of fecal sludge management and how to invest in providers of technology or solutions. In fact, we recently closed one of our first transactions in Kenya, helping out Sanovation on the work that they are doing. And so I wanted to make sure that every single one of you out there who's listening appreciates the fact that when we talk about this as a solution, this is not exclusively something that applies only to what PSS LADEPA is doing, but in fact, all of you that are struggling to find the type of financing that you need from a commercial point of view should look at these alternative sources and in particular think about what role impact investors can play in helping to bridge the financing gap. Thank you, and back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jeremy. In working with Water Unite and with Jeremy's team and with PSS LADEPA, we have identified some key steps that PSS LADEPA is going to need to take in order to grow its market share, expand its capability, and provide additional services. The idea is that they need to expand the service offering to cover the whole value chain. In South African municipalities, it is typical that the municipality awards a contract to a pit emptying company without a requirement for future treatment and disposal. By changing the terms of reference for that, you would create an immediate business-to-business market opportunity for a technology provider like PSS LUDEPA. There's a great effort in South Africa towards the idea of beneficiation or valorization of the end product. The idea that turning the carbon-rich end product into commercial grade fertilizers, to look at activated carbon and other end-use devices as fuel and the like, reduces or offsets some of the cost of operation. We're targeting approximately a 40% offset. Recognizing that many municipalities' CapEx budgets are constrained, PSS LUDEPA has come up with a lease model that incorporates the provision of the equipment, but also an O&M component. It effectually results in a build, own, operate, and transfer model, or a BOOT model, that increases affordability for municipalities. We are looking at other case studies on the continent and globally, looking at a systems approach or the idea of a circular economy approach. And finally, I would like to flag that my organization, USAID WashFin, is expecting to release a technical note very soon on globalwaters.org that will assess the market creation challenges for sanitation treatment technologies like LUDEPA. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the chats.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Najib Bateganya Mkoya from Kampala, Uganda. And I am happy to present to you this exciting work we did in Kampala on a city-wide pit emptying smart subsidy that targeted vulnerable urban poor communities in Kampala city during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll give you a brief background about this topic, the Kampala context, and specifically mention a few highlights on the impacts of COVID-19 on pit emptying services, the objectives of the subsidy, the approach and methodology for the implementation of this program, some key results and conclusions. So just to give a quick background, as we all know, cities are growing very fast in this region and world over. And we know that one of the greatest development challenge are the informal settlements that lack basic services and infrastructure. The pandemic for COVID-19 deepened this problem, especially for access to basic services. And we see decreased access to safely managed sanitation with gross disruption of the demand and supply, especially for services that are structured around private sector service delivery. So with over 90% of the population and households in Kampala and many other cities in sub-Saharan Africa dependent on on-site sanitation, disruption of pit emptying services in particular created quite a bit of problems, and for Kampala particularly, we noted this as a high risk in terms of public health and potential for additional problems in terms of cholera outbreaks and other wash-related diseases. So it was critical, therefore, that an intervention in terms of relief pit emptying services, especially to the most vulnerable, was structured to support the pit emptying businesses, as well as provide relief for the urban poor communities that couldn't afford to access this service. So very quickly in Kampala city, so you note that like others, over 60% of the households. Yeah, so Kampala city has a resident population of about 3 million, over 3 million people. And this is an influx from all the surrounding municipalities that come to work. But most critical for this presentation to note is that over 60% live in informal settlements. If you look at the bottom left, the map there shows the sanitation coverage. You notice that the green part in the center is the only sewerage coverage, so less than 10%. And the remainder, the purple and blue, are mainly either septic tanks in blue, and purple, the pit latrines, so either lined or unlined and with varying qualities. So you notice, therefore, that all these populations depend on pit emptying technologies, and in Kampala, these are mainly cesspool and also gulping services that have been developed over the last 5 years. You notice, therefore, that when you disrupt pit emptying services, majority of the population is going to lack adequate means of managing the fecal sludge generated on site. And this is why Kampala City decided to design this relief emptying service. So a little bit of the disruption of COVID-19 on emptying. So both demand and supply are grossly constrained. So the demand generally reduced due to reduced affordability and willingness to pay, while of course the supply side, the providers of this service, were constrained due to lack of demand, of course restricted movements, and high operational costs. But you also note that in some circumstances, even when the demand was available, it was quite difficult to operate due to reduction in operation hours of the treatment plant, especially during the lockdown. Okay, so the objective of this subsidy, one was primarily to reduce public health risks and environmental pollution due to potential indiscriminate disposal of fecal sludge, especially in informal settlements. And specifically for this program, the first specific objective was to design up an appropriate subsidy model targeting the most vulnerable of the populations. And secondly, to analyze access to these services in terms of vulnerability and spatial distribution across the city. The third was to assess the beneficiary contribution. So some of the subsidized service attracted additional demand from the beneficiaries. So we wanted to know how that contribution came through. And lastly, we also wanted to understand the client satisfaction in terms of quality of service provided. So the overall approach was designed in 3 stages. So the subsidy model, which was really designed based on a spatial analysis of the sanitation coverage, the informal settlements in the city, and also the vulnerability in terms of access to sanitation. And also the service package was defined at this stage. So what entailed the subsidy for the beneficiaries, and most importantly, design of a stakeholder participation approach to ensure that the existing local leadership structures are involved in the whole process. During implementation, the program focused on identifying the beneficiaries, procurement of the service providers, designing a voucher system for the beneficiaries to access the service, and linking the beneficiaries to the service providers using the call center system, and then designing and implementing a monitoring, verification, and payment mechanism. So the last part was then evaluation, really focusing on the satisfaction survey, rapid satisfaction survey, and evaluation of quality of service. And during this whole process, so the whole business process then was structured where the city authority led the whole design and implementation. Then when it came to definition of the package and validation of service delivered to the target beneficiaries, the local communities, the co-leadership were involved. And these also got involved, especially took lead in the mobilization of the beneficiaries and ensuring the service is delivered. The private sector led the provision of the service via the call center and verified through the voucher system. The verification and evaluation and payment was the responsibility of the city authority. So the key results here, as noted, so the sanitation vulnerability mapping was based on an existing sanitation database, which has information on sanitation coverage, informal settlements, areas prone to cholera, and similar information. This was used to develop the vulnerability map and also prioritization of the target areas across the city. Yes, in terms of the design, again, the services delivered were delivered using the registered private operators. These are mainly cesspool and GALPA emptiers. The beneficiary the service for each household was 1 barrel of GALPA, 1 barrel of a 0.2 cubic meter fecal sludge, and this barrel was emptied using a GALPA. And for community toilets in these vulnerable areas was 1 cesspool trip, and that is a 4 cubic meter trip. These were the services. The targets, it targeted all divisions across the city, and mainly wards that are over 75% informal, and the households were those with full pits and vulnerability in terms of households head, so female headed, the elderly, child headed households, and such communities. So 2,500 households were targeted across the city, and 500 public toilets as well. The pricing model for the subsidy was competitive because it followed a competitive bidding process, whereas the additional service for the beneficiaries was negotiated directly. So in terms of access, so you note that the communities, community activation teams were the main active community mobilizers, followed by local councils and other local leaders in terms of contacting the beneficiary households. So most of the pits that were emptied were lined, and this followed a big campaign over the last 5 years across the city for households to construct lined pits. Characteristic of many informal settlements, of course, you notice that most of the pits were shared across neighborhoods, whereas only 9% were individual toilets. So this is just to show you again numbers in terms of households. So you notice in the third column, the total households that benefited exceeded our target. So the demand was quite high. We also note that the additional demand created by the beneficiary households, so services paid or own contribution over and above the subsidy almost matched what the city provided. So basically this subsidy created additional demand and mobilized additional financing from the households. And we also note that the female-headed households benefited more. So in terms of community toilets, yeah, we see a reduced number compared to the target because we noted that we needed to divert more funds to the households. Yeah, so the quality of service was generally rated satisfactory, with most of them, the households or the beneficiaries are satisfied about and excited about the relief emptying service provided by the city authority. We also noted that most of the service providers responded within the day of a call from the beneficiary. So that was a very good turnaround time. And of course, we also had service providers who did respond quite well, up to almost over 2 days after being called. Yeah, so these are some of the quotes from the beneficiaries, appreciating the good service, noting that this was a timely intervention, especially during the very difficult pandemic period during lockdown. Yeah, in conclusion, so we note that this is a very innovative approach to expanding services across cities, and it can only not work in Uganda, it can be expanded to other cities in sub-Saharan Africa. We also noted that a stakeholder mapping process and transparent participation was critical in the successful delivery of this program. ICT is becoming critical in terms of service delivery, and we note that the call center here, the digital voucher system, and the mobile application for accessing service was critical for efficiency in terms of connecting the clients to the service providers, as well as verification and evaluation of the efficiency of service delivery. The other point is private sector participation is really important, well structured in Kampala, and we found that this was a very good approach compared to public service delivery. And lastly, we noted that the limited subsidy fund triggered or unlocked contribution from the households. So it was an incentive to create additional demand for improved sanitation. Thank you so much, and I thank you for your kind attention. If you have any questions or comments about what I have covered in my presentation today, please leave them in the comments section. Please also consider joining one of the live discussion sessions to share your thoughts. You can find a schedule for these sessions on the agenda page.
As expert organization on FSM, Border has decades of successful implementations in various regions on the ground. We are constantly adapting our approaches based on lessons learned. By this, Border brings in innovations to the sector to improve adequate fecal sludge management globally.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Fiona Zakaria from University of Leeds. I have been working for Cactus Project, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Cactus is an acronym for Climate and Cost in Urban Sanitation. This project has an ambition to set a global sanitation cost benchmarking. My talk today will be focusing on the cost data collection and analysis using Cactus method. We need to know the relative cost of systems that deliver safely managed urban sanitation. At the end, we want to be able to inform local governments and other sanitation planners about the range of actual costs of working sanitation system in a city of certain size, density in a given location or region. These are the actual costs as reported by the sanitation operators. We also want to be able to do an objective cost comparison of ranges of sanitation technology, globally, regionally, or at city level. And we also want to know what the cost drivers may be. Hunting for sanitation cost data can be frustrating, as you can see from the panda here in the picture. From previous research and our own literature search, we observed that costing data is scarce, it's poorly documented or kept confidential. Cost information is not an information that can be lightly shared. The other problem is that the cost information is incomplete. Either only a part of sanitation system is known. For example, it's toilet only or treatment only, or only part of the total cost. So only probably the CapEx only or OpEx only. The next problem is that the sanitation costing is lacking of comparable metric. It's lacking framework by which cost estimates can be normalized for both quality and scale of the service. So doing our data collection, we have to consider all of this. Before setting ourselves to the arduous task of collecting data, we needed to establish the standard costing method, addressing the lack of comparable costing metric by choosing the comparable metrics. In this case, we chose total annualized cost per household, or we shorten it as TAC, all converted into a currency of choice, in this case, international dollars with reference year of 2018. And we also classify the range of the technologies into two systems, wastewater system or sewer-based system, and FSM. From here, following the sanitation value chain, we can have 5 elements, which consists of containment, emptying, transport, separated, or emptying transport together, and treatment. From these 5 elements, it can be broken down into total 27 components. And we also categorize the cost items. So the big category is CapEx and OpEx that can be broken down into these general costs. Long story short of the data collection process, we managed to collect 87 data points from 17 components in 25 cities in 10 countries. We find that the total annual cost for a complete sanitation system range from $120 to $800 per household. This, of course, varies with technology, region, scale, and density. This is our current data set. At a glance, the top technology range clustered as wastewater system or sewer-based system. And comparing this wastewater system with FSM system at the bottom part, it appears that wastewater system is cost relatively higher than FSM, but don't be in a hurry tweeting this, that sewer is expensive and FSM is cheap, because it's not actual. We have to be cautious with this data. For example, for the fact that sewer-based system shows higher costs is actually demonstrating their low connectivity. Sewer-based system needs high investment costs, while FSM system does not. Therefore, if sewer system is not utilized to serve many connections, then the cost will ultimately be high. A couple of things to be cautious about this data. Notice that certain component seems to be dominated by data from 1 or 2 countries. For example, as you can see, pointed back is machine-powered aerobic wastewater treatment. Many data points come from China. Also, nearly all sewer with pumping data points have come from Peru. And also notice that there is extremely wide range at conventional sewers with pumping. So this all adds to the data uncertainty. However, while the CapEx follows similar pattern to the TAC, the operational liability, as is shown here, we found that is actually similar across both systems. Doing the data analysis, we question what may be the cost drivers. We think that across all components, the cost drivers may be related to the level of connectivity, that is how many households they serve, the locations, such as factors like topography, or maybe the location itself, or like where it is, the regions. And also the scale related to population density and size of the city. At the moment, we are yet able to say the definite cost drivers, but here is an example to illustrate this complexity. Comparing annualized cost per household of vacuum trucks in 3 locations, Denkana, India, Khulna, Bangladesh, and Nakuru in Kenya, we can see that Denkana truck costs double of the other 2 cases. This is not in agreement with previous research saying that it tends to be more expensive in Africa because they usually import vehicles such as vacuum trucks. From these 3 cases, we can see that operational cost is dominant, but with different composition. The fuel expenses appear to be much lower in Bangladesh, which is probably caused by the close proximity to treatment location and or flat terrain. So it doesn't really spend much fuel. Or maybe it is low in cost because the system serves many more people than the other 2 cases. The latter is confirmed with data supported by the fact that the total annualized cost per household at the bottom of the table is the lowest. Now, from this, we learned that cost segregation helped to examine the cost drivers. As illustrated here, having the cost segregation help us to identify that the cost for vacuum trucks are all dominated by the OPEX rather than CAPEX, like we find in other technology. However, we need more data to be able to say that the highest cost of vacuum truck is the fuel, for example. Such information will be useful for locations with high dependency to fuel availability. Or if we can confirm that the cost driver is labors, like probably is the case for Khulna case here, it will inform those locations whose manual labor cost is high. Moving forward, we are trying to get more data from different locations and components. Hence, we are working on improving data collection by establishing an online platform accessible to all. So not only people can enter their data, they can also compare their data with others people's data. We are working on having this platform available soon, hopefully by summer this year. Therefore, I'm using this opportunity to invite people to collaborate with us. What you can see here is the work in progress to compose workbook for data entry. This work would not have been possible if we did not get help from our data collectors, our MSc Watch students, data sharing partners such as Acquia and Citywise, hosting organizations at field offices and UK offices such as WhatsApp, Water Sanitation for Urban Poor, Practical Action, WaterAid, SNV, and many more. And of course, not recognizing all the sanitation operators at municipality offices, site technicians, and managers. Please check our open access paper by scanning the QR code or go to the short URL. My contact is displayed there. I'm happy to talk about this more, so don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.
We are introducing our next big innovation, the Umalulu app. The Umalulu app offers stakeholders, including municipalities, contractors, and beneficiaries, access to data and tools that will ensure efficiency and transparency. Here's to the improvement of dignity and quality of life.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Murwenda. I want to present my presentation entitled The Dilemma Between Tax Revenue and SDGs Should We Impose VAT on Wastewater Treatment Services in Indonesia. Without further ado, let me start the presentation. As developing country, Indonesia has struggled with a problem with domestic wastewater treatment. There are only 13 cities from 514 cities, which is only around 3% in Indonesia that already have large-scale wastewater treatment systems. Eventually, the situation leads to other significant problems, such as high stunting rates in Indonesia, as shown in figure 2. Indonesia's stunting rate is high, considering the WHO maximum limit is 20% of the total number of toddlers. In fact, by 2030, Indonesia is targeting to achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation, hygiene for all, and to end the practice of defecating in the open area, as stated in the SDGs 6.2 target. What is the relation between wastewater treatment and taxes? In Indonesia, the service is VAT objects. Meanwhile, for the government, VAT is a significant source of state revenue. Table 1 shows the trend of decreasing tax revenue in Indonesia. On the other hand, there has been an increase in government spending as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In Table 2, during 2016 and 2020, tax revenue had decreased in 2020. In the meantime, the contribution of VAT on tax revenues continues to increase. even when the pandemic takes place, reaching 49% in 2020. So the government is very dependent on VAT revenues. According to the background, the study has three objectives as seen on the slide, especially to reconstruct the VAT policy on wastewater treatment services. We conducted this study with a contractivism paradigm and a qualitative approach. The data collection techniques used were field research and focus group discussions, or FGD. We carried out field research at 3 provinces in Indonesia, namely DKI Jakarta, Medan, and Surakarta. Meanwhile, FGDs was conducted 2 times with various informants as listed in the slide. In this research, we think that one of the policies that have a strategic role in encouraging this sector is tax policy. According to Musgrave and Musgrave, the tax has a significant role in implementing government functions within the functions of allocations, distribution, stabilizations, and regulations. In general, the tax functions can be categorized into 2, namely as a source of safe and sustainable state revenue and as a political instrument. We emphasize these functions to accelerate development in a society, including SDGs. Here are the results and discussions parts. The slide shows the current VAT regulations on wastewater treatment services in Indonesia. Currently, wastewater and its processing services are VAT objects, as stipulated in these 2 legal umbrellas, and the VAT rate per se in Indonesia is 10%. Regarding the relation between wastewater and clean water, it is found that there are different VAT treatments on clean water and its services. Clean water is exempted from VAT, otherwise with wastewater. So this is what we fight for, the equal treatment between both in terms of VAT exemption. This study revealed that VAT on wastewater increases the burden of society by 10% because I said that the rate of VAT is 10% itself. This additional burden potentially reduces the public's interest in using the services. Besides that, we found that Indonesian people awareness of sanitation is relatively low. Most people believe it strongly needs government intervention instead of active participation from citizens. These findings are also supported by MARPLUS and IWAS Plus research in 2019. The study reported public apathy on sanitation and wastewater treatment, and the government should find solutions. Ultimately, VAT will result in 10% rise in services fees for wastewater treatment. Then it will generate more public. In this case, we see that people have to pay more for something which is not a priority in their lives. We found also that private participation in this sector funding is very low due to several factors. First, the relatively large investment needs, such as land and infrastructure provisions, which local governments mostly carry out this sector with state or provincial or donor funds. Second, the trend of bad debts on cash flow and a large investment in sanitation has made the private reluctant to fund the sector. It also indicates a market failure if these services are delivered by the private sector. We think, is VAT incentive necessary? Taking this into account, the government should provide VAT incentives for this sector. The government can use the legal framework, Article 4A and 16B of Indonesian VATing law, regarding VAT exemption on certain taxable goods and services. The government may include wastewater and its processing on non-taxable objects. As we mentioned before, treatment for clean water is different from wastewater. Clean water is included in non-taxable goods or services. However, the government argues that wastewater treatment activities are not a high priority economic activity, so they are not worthy of being granted VAT exemptions. Yet, if we look at the water cycle, producing clean water and domestic wastewater is a cyclical and inseparable process. So it is supposed to be a unity in operation and has equal treatment in taxation. The sanitation issue is also an urgent activity, which is part of economic activity that substantially impacts health and the environment. As an instrument of development, tax policy needs to be designed carefully so as not to incur the high cost of taxation, but for the government in the form of collection costs and policy costs, also as for the society in the form of compliance costs, both direct money costs, time costs, and psychological costs. Those proper VAT policy support is needed to address the emergence of state levies that hamper this sector's development. This policy is very possible implemented because it already has a legal umbrella in the VAT law. We believe in the end, in aggregate, due to this policy, the benefits received by the government and society will be much greater than VAT foregone revenue of wastewater treatment services. Besides providing VAT exemption, we suggest that VAT incentives can be provided not only for public operators, but also for private parties who collaborate with the governments. Limited government funding for sanitation can be supported by private investment. That concludes my presentations today. We really appreciate and welcome your constructive feedback and input to improve our study substance. Thank you. Hello, I am Wenda from Jakarta, Indonesia. Please join me for my presentations on the dilemma between tax revenue and SDGs. Should we impose VAT on wastewater treatment services in Indonesia at FSM 6? I hope to see you there. Please also consider joining one of the live discussion sessions to share your thoughts. You can find a schedule for these sessions on the agenda page. See you.
Hello everyone, welcome to FSM 6 virtual conference. Today I'm going to talk about inclusive septic tank desludging services in small and medium towns of Maharashtra, India. I'm making this presentation on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Meera Mehta, Dr. Dinesh, Jikisha Jaiswal, and my colleagues who are stationed in the city and working on this project. And I represent the Center for Water and Sanitation, which is located in Ahmedabad, and it's part of CEPT University. So before moving on to the story of Y and Sinner, I would need to acknowledge that India has achieved great strides within this last 5 years in terms of attaining SDGs 6.2 and through many of its flagship programs, one of which is the Swachh Bharat mission. Under this mission, almost 6 million toilets have been built and almost all cities, around 4,300 cities have been declared open defecation free. But the country did realize that it's not good not to stop at toilets, but go beyond toilets and manage the entire sanitation service chain, because of which the focus moved beyond the toilets and the framework of ODF plus and plus plus was formulated by Government of India, where ODF plus plus means that you are managing your on-site waste through fecal sludge and septage management. In terms of national level, ODF++, which is fecal sludge and septage management, has attained great strides. In last 3 years, we have a national policy on fecal sludge and septage management. Government of India has initiated and included FSM in its national programs like Swachh Bharat Mission, Amrut, and now the upcoming Jal Jeevan Mission. Many states, as you can see on the right, have taken up FSTPs at big scale. As of now, almost 700 plus FSTPs are at various stages of planning and implementation. And all this has been pushed through an agenda that the national consortia, we have the National Fecal Sludge and Septic Man Alliance, which works together, which is a 30 national international agency which have come together to push the agenda of fecal sludge and septic management at national levels. And on the left, you can see various policies and guidelines that have included FSSM in their structure of the program. Now moving on to from country level to the state where we have been working, because this is one of our focus states, Maharashtra. It's one of the urbanized states of India, and it has also taken up FSSM in a big way. It has now, once it was declared ODF in 2017, it had resolutions to move towards beyond toilets. It had incentivized cities to take up FSSM through and allowed them to use the incentive grants and the 14th FC funds for fecal sludge activities. And as of now, almost 70 cities are practicing co-treatment of FS within their STPs or nearby STPs, and around 311 FSTPs are under construction. Now, the reason why we talked about the national level and the state level program was that many of the learnings that we are going to talk in the later slides have been adapted or have influenced this national and state policies in the programming structure and all. So now let's begin with the story of Maharashtra, where of these two cities, where Maharashtra began with citywide inclusive FSSM in these two cities in 2014. These are small and medium towns ranging with a population of around 43,000 to 72,000. They were declared ODF in 2016 and have also now attained ODF++ in 2018-19. This was one of the first cities to implement scheduled desludging, which is a citywide inclusive FSM service delivery. And some of the key highlights are it implemented schedule emptying. It involved a private sector for providing these emptying operations. They levied a tax to finance this service. And FSTP has been set up using their own funds as well as some philanthropic funds. Online monitoring systems have been set up to monitor the inclusivity aspects of emptying and treatment. There is reuse of treated wastewater and byproducts are being reused. And very important, there is a huge municipal commitment. The local government has taken up the commitment and leadership to implement these programs. So this city is from 2014, where we were calling them as urban laboratories. They have now moved to more like a lighthouse cities, which are showing guidance to other cities and how it can be taken up. So talking in more detail, both the cities had an executive order in 2014 that where they resolved that they will do citywide inclusive FSSM service delivery through scheduled desludging, involve a private sector, they allocated land, and they levied taxes to finance these services. When the program began, like any other cities in India or any part of the world, it was a demand-based desludging where the septic tanks were being desludged at low frequency, because of which there were environmental impacts and manual scavenging may be taking place. At the same time, because of less desludging frequency of like 8 to 10 years, the desludging costs were very high, and people were paying distress fee to desludge it. And this also had some detrimental effects in terms of people not using toilets, that they were feeling that their toilets would get full, so they were not using toilets. So these were all the vicious cycle of not desludging regularly of septic tanks. So the idea was to move from complaint redressal to a scheduled service, wherein on-demand services like when your septic tank gets full, you call a local government or a private sector, they desludge it for a fee. Against that, a scheduled service is a service where the septic tanks are desludged in a predetermined schedule, adequate number of infrastructure is provided, and it can be financed through taxes or through local government funds. So how would this planning happen? Like your door-to-door collection service, where the truck comes daily to your house to collect the garbage, in similar fashion, under scheduled desludging, the septic tank truck will come to your house once in 3 years for the cycle of Vayansina, because it was a 3-year cycle. So the city was divided into 3 zones, and we also mapped the vulnerable areas, as you can see in blue spots, to monitor whether the services were inclusive or not. Emptying trucks based on number of septic tanks to be desludged were decided, and the route planning was done. The local government decided to involve a private sector where the assets were brought in by the private. It was a performance-linked contract where the private sector was paid against performance, that in case they had to desludge 2,000 septic tanks a year and they desludge only 50%, they're only getting paid for the 50% of the contract. Similarly, clauses related to safety of sanitation workers were also inserted and are being monitored. Escrow mechanism has been set up to safeguard the private sector against a delayed payment, where a pool of funds is kept in an account to pay to the private sector. And all this was done through a transparent bidding process. So as a part of the contract, all the households with septic tanks, whether they are in slum or non-slum area, were covered through this contract, and the service was provided by the private sector on the behalf of the council. The model that was followed was a performance-linked annuity model, where the capex and the opex for the truck and the service was brought in by the private sector. They desludged the septic tanks once in 3 years and collected that septage and discharged it at the FSTP. In return, the properties paid a sanitation tax to the local government, and the local government, through an escrow mechanism, transferred the annual fees through annuity payment to the private sector based on performance. The cities levied, to finance this, as we talked before, they levied differential sanitation tax ranging from $4 to $1.5 an annum. And the idea now, this is a flat tax, but the city is now moving towards levying it as a percentage of property tax to make it more equitable, so that properties with smaller property footprints pay less taxes compared to the ones which have larger footprints of property. So to make it more equitable, it's now moving towards percentage of property tax. To treat, I think after collecting, it's important to treat. So these two cities have set up a 70 KLD treatment plant, which has now an energy neutral plant because they have set up solar systems, solar panels to provide energy, and the treated wastewater is being reused in urban forest and landscaping purposes. And you can see the photos of urban forest and landscaping in the photos below. I think one of the key things for success of this inclusive service delivery was awareness, where awareness was done in person, where household visits were done. WhatsApp videos, social media was used extensively to pass on the message about how this service is going to be provided, and various posters and banners and messages were sent out by the local government and by the private sector. Now, to monitor all of this service, the emptying and the treatment, it's important to monitor whether it's happening or not and whether it's inclusive. So systems like Sanitab were set up, which captures the on-site sanitation information of septic tanks, which is like first of its kind database, which is an actual database of septic tanks. The Sanitrack helps monitor whether the fecal sludge is collected properly from the households and gets discharged at the treatment plant. And it's a signature-based app like an Amazon service delivery, which tracks both these signatures, and then only the payment is made to the private sector for that septic tank. And we have also set up SanQ system, which monitors the effluent quality of treated wastewater. So we are able to monitor the FSTP operations. Through these systems of Sanitab and Sanitrack, we are able to map whether in the vulnerable areas that I mentioned before, are we providing services in an inclusive manner or not, has been able to monitor, and whether the private sector is using proper operations and processes. Now, apart from service delivery being inclusive, it's also important to recognize that there are SAN workers, and women engagement is also very important to make the service more inclusive. So in terms of sanitation workers, the Sanitab Sanitrack app, through its dashboard, monitors the PP usage of desludgers. Training workshops were organized by the council for the sanitation workers, and PPEs were distributed for, and training for their use was also done. And based on the experience of this scheduled desludging services, the council, the local government introduced clauses for provision of PP contracts in all their upcoming sanitation contracts. So that was a big win for the service delivery, that it was being scaled up to other services as well. And in terms of women empowerment, I think through this service delivery, I think we, as this council, had almost 50% women representation in terms of the executive body of the council. We built their capacities, worked with them to build their participation in FSM service delivery. We celebrated women sanitation champions, as you can see in the right. This is the FSTP operator, Snehal, who is operating the FSTP for last 3 years. And we also have the chief officers, the mayors, and the chairperson of Y Municipal Council, who have been leading the pathway for this service delivery in the council. And at the same time, I think households are very important. And our team has been working with the council for sensitizing the women regarding the desludging process. And it's important to recognize that when we educate the women, we educate a family. So I think that's our motto, and we have been engaging with the women into our planning and service delivery model that we have in this Y and Sinnar. So what we have been able to achieve in this last 3-4 years of scheduled services, 4,200 septic tanks have been desludged as compared to, let's say, 400 that were getting desludged in some previous years. Almost 7,400 plus properties have been covered. Vulnerable properties are being serviced and are being provided service, and it's being monitored. Almost 28 million liters of septage has been treated. 95% acceptance rate of scheduled services has been observed. The sanitation workers are wearing safety gears. Women are being empowered for providing this service. Households are paying tax, and both the cities have retained their status of ODF++ as defined by Government of India. So these are some of the big wins of this scheduled citywide inclusive FSSM service delivery. Now it's important to say that it's not only about these two cities, but how are these things being scaled up? So this scaling up has happened in Maharashtra through policies and guidelines, which we talked before. It has influenced the national policies and guidelines as well. Tools have been developed so that it can be replicated easily, and training can be conducted so that it can be done in other local governments of India as well as across the globe. And model tenders and standard operating procedures have been created, and they have been disseminated during the trainings and with the sector partners so that they can also take this up as a service. It's important to recognize that this could not have happened without the partnerships and collaborations and to attain this scale. So we are thankful to our funders, Gates Foundation, HSBC, and DFID, our government partners, both the councils and the state government, and the National Fecal Sludge and Septic Management Alliance for taking these ideas to scale at India level. And just to summarize, I think for the benefits for the scheduled services can be summarized in these 6 bullet points. It's an equitable and inclusive service which covers all the properties that have a septic tank through this service. The prices that are offered are at much lower rates because of operational efficiency gains and all, and people don't pay distress fee, but instead of that they pay a minimum tax against which they are provided this service. The behavior change, people have started to use toilets because they are aware that their septic tanks will be getting at these desludge once in 3 years through this service. There is no need for manual labor because the septage won't solidify as this desludge more regularly. That's more important is infrastructure optimization. The number of trucks, their fecal sludge treatment plant sizes are now sized according to the requirements, and it's not an overestimate or an underestimate, but it's more optimally used. And the likely benefits of the scheduled desludging services are in terms of environmental benefits, where there are likely reductions in the BODs that are coming out in the septic tank effluent, and it improves overall ground and river water quality monitoring. So these are all the ideas that are benefited through this inclusive scheduled desludging services. You can read more about our interventions on our website, pass.org.in or cwas.org.in. You will get more details about this work. If you have any questions or comments about what I have covered in my presentation today, please leave them in the comment section and I'll be happy to answer them over the chat. Please also consider joining one of the live discussion sessions to share your thoughts. You can find a schedule for these sessions on the agenda page. Thank you.